This video is on the Introduction to Nanotechnology, Module number 1 from the Pennsylvania State University. I did modify some of the slides, but the majority is right from the Pennsylvania State University educational materials. Module 1 is about nanotechnology. Basically, what is it and why is it so important now? This is some information about how the work was funded and basically an outline on what we're going to talk about. Let me just go to this outline a second. So we will discuss what does nanotechnology mean. Different size ranges are important for you guys to understand and know. How old is nanotechnology? That's a good half of what this project is about, some of the history of nanotechnology and why is it taking off now. But the other thing that I want to let you guys know is I linked this international organization of nanotechnology glossary, and it has a lot of the vocabulary that you should be familiar with right in that glossary. So if there's something that you're not familiar with, obviously you can Google it, but it might be defined in that link. So that's something that you might want to bookmark or have handy for you. So first of all, this is very important. What does the prefix nano mean? The word nano originally comes from the Greek word nanos, meaning dwarf. In Roman times, like 2,000 years ago, the word had changed to nano, but it continued to mean dwarf. In modern Italian, the word is still nano and it still means dwarf. Today, in scientific usage, it is not a word, but it is a prefix, and it means really, really, really small. Or, more precisely, it means 1 over 1 billion of something. So 1 billionth of something, and that's very small. What does the word nanotechnology mean? It means technology based on man-made things or uses that are really, really small. Or more precisely, it means technology based on man-made things whose sizes are such that at least one dimension is in the range of 1 billionth of a meter. And typically, the nanotechnology range is 1 nanometer to 100 nanometers, approximately. So that's kind of the range of what they call nanotechnology or nanoscale, 1 to 100 nanometers. So how small is 1 billionth of a meter? Pretty small. This is a nice scale. So 1 meter, as you guys know, is about 3 feet. So you know what a yard is. It's slightly a few inches longer than a yard. I think 39 inches approximately. So 1 meter is approximately 3 feet. So a centimeter, you guys know what a centimeter is. It's approximately the width of your finger. And if I had you in algebra, we might have done a little, little activity around this. So a centimeter is about the width of your finger. A millimeter, I think we would oftentimes use the height of a dime is a millimeter. So it's 10 times smaller than a centimeter. And then we have micrometer, which is also called a micron, which is 1,000 times smaller than a millimeter. And then you have your nanometer. And then 1,000 times smaller than a nanometer is a picometer. And you seniors in chemistry, you'll see the picometer length at times. Another way of looking at how small a nanometer is that one human hair, the width of one human hair has about 100,000 nanometers across. So if you cut a human hair into 100,000 sections, one of those sections is a nanometer. Another way you could imagine it is if you look at your fingernail and count for 5 seconds, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. Your fingernail just grew about 5 nanometers. Now we're going to talk about scales. So different scale ranges. You might have heard nanoscale. So CNSE, where our school is located, is the College of Nanoscale or Nanoscience. So nanoscale is smaller, the smallest scale of these three scales. And like I said, it's about a billionth of a meter. Okay. Now, if you go bigger than a nanoscale, you get the microscale. It's a thousand times bigger. And it's about 1/1,000,000th of a meter. And if you go 1,000 times bigger than that, it's a macro scale. And this is anything bigger than a millimeter. So you could pretty much see macro scale with your naked eye, right? You could take a ruler and see the millimeter easily with your naked eye. Micro scale, you probably need a light microscope at least. And nanoscale, you have to have a very powerful electron microscope of some sort. So how do we see in these different ranges? I think I just mentioned that in the macro scale, the meter size range, you could easily see it with your naked eye. And the millimeter size range, well, you can see a millimeter, but if it gets a little bit smaller than a millimeter, you might need to use an optical microscope. The micro scale, the micrometer, you might be able to see it with an optical microscope, but the smaller objects in the micro scale, you might need an electron microscope. And the nanometer range, you pretty much have to have an electron microscope. Now, electron microscopes have been around for many, many, many years, decades. But more recently, there are microscopes called like the atomic force microscopes. And these can actually see individual atoms. So they're relatively recent. I would guess like 10, 20 years now. But for the nanoscale, you need very, very powerful microscopes. This slide shows some small naturally occurring and man-made structures, just to give you kind of like examples in each of the areas. So macro scale is what we're most familiar with, right? So you could see it with your naked eye. Sometimes you might want to use a light microscope, the kind we have in our classrooms. Should be able to see it. Then in the micro scale, these are some of the bigger ones you might be able to see with our classroom microscopes, which are not, super duper powerful, but some of the smaller ones, when you get into the small micron area, you'll have to have a very powerful, like professional, or maybe sometimes even electron microscope. So examples of the micro scale are like human cells, bacteria, like those kinds of things, very small. Then you have the nanoscale, and this is what this class is mostly about. Viruses are on the nanoscale. Molecules can be on the nanoscale. Proteins. These DNA, I guess, is on the small end of the nanoscale. The width of the skinny part of the DNA is about 2 nanometers wide. The length is pretty long, but the width is very, very small, 2 nanometers. So that's the DNA. Oh, a big one. Transistors of 2007, while transistors of 2020 are in the, I want to say, 3 to 5 nanometer scale. So we've gotten way smaller since this slideshow was made back in 2009. And then if you get to even smaller than that, you're in the picometer. PM is picometer. These are individual atoms. Not too many things so far in the picometer scale because they're just so tiny, much smaller than even 1 nanometer. Okay. So this slide is the picoscale is the size range of the basic Legos used to build everything else, individual atoms. So again, atoms are in the picoscale. If you look at the table S of your reference tables for chemistry, there's a list of atomic radii for not all, but most of the elements on the periodic scale, and they tend to be like in the 100 to maybe 200 picometer scale. So very, very small. Oh, so this slide is important because you need to understand there is a significant difference between nanoscience and nanotechnology. And I added this scale. I got these definitions from this source here at the bottom. But okay, so what is science? Science is basically using observations and experiments to discover facts about nature and how to formulate laws and principles based on these facts. So it's just learning foundational information to learn new stuff, right? What is technology? The key part of technology I highlighted here is the application of science to meet an objective or solve a problem. So you're using the science to solve a problem or meet an objective of some sort, right? So that's the difference between nanoscience, which is science on a small scale. You're trying to find out facts and things about, nature. And technology is to using that information in order to solve problems. Okay, so significant difference. So let's see if that makes sense to you. So is this nanotechnology or nanoscience? This discovery of how the gecko can walk on ceilings and stick to glass walls of an aquarium. Is that nanoscience or nanotechnology? Well, oops, I didn't give you the answer here, I guess. Sugar. It's nanoscience, actually, because just understanding how the gecko does that doesn't actually solve any problems that we might have or objectives. It's just, oh, now I know how that works. What about this one? Discovery of the myosin protein acts like a linear motor to contract a muscle or the myosin molecule. Shoot.